These are the recorded lectures for Chapter 1, Evolution, the Themes of Biology, and Scientific Inquiry. And we will focus primarily on the themes of biology and scientific inquiry because we have a chapter on evolution toward the end of the course. So we'll really just summarize evolution more than anything. So I'm going to skip through this is slide number 3. So we're looking at slide number 3. Concept 1.3 says, in studying nature, scientists make observations and form and test hypotheses. So the word science means to know. Inquiry is the search for information and explanations of natural phenomena. And the scientific method is the process of inquiry that includes observations, hypotheses, and then experiments, testing the hypotheses. So biologists describe natural structures and processes, and this approach is based on observation and analysis of data. Recorded observations are called data. If the data are qualitative data, then they don't have numbers. So qualitative data might be, I don't know, let me think for a second. Maybe there'll be an example. Here we go. Qualitative data on the chimpanzees. Okay, so this is Jane Goodall. You may have heard of her, but she spent her life living with and studying chimpanzees. So just whenever she's describing their behavior, for example, when she describes their behavior and how, I don't know, one of them looks like he's poking the other one in the nose, that is qualitative data, right? And quantitative data is numbers, okay? And you can put quantitative data in graphs and tables. Now, we use two types of reasoning when we solve problems in science, when we use the scientific method. Inductive reasoning is when we draw conclusions through the logical process of induction. So when we formulate a hypothesis, we're using inductive reasoning. That's when we draw a conclusion by induction. So, but the main thing is to know inductive reasoning is when we formulate a hypothesis. And we do that before we design our experiment. And then deductive reasoning is when we formulate a theory. So it uses general premises to make specific predictions. So the formulation of a hypothesis uses inductive reasoning, and then when we generate a theory from many, many hypotheses, from many experiments, from many different scientists, that is deductive reasoning. A hypothesis is defined, and by the way, let's go back because I'm not really telling you what to write in your notes, and if you're, hopefully you're taking notes on your own. So what I'm going to do is if the term is important, I'm going to highlight it. So make sure in your notes that you understand that when we collect data, that it can be qualitative, which is a description, or quantitative, which includes numbers. Quantitative data is numerical, whereas qualitative data is when we describe, like Jane Goodall describing the behavior of the chimpanzees. Make sure that you know that inductive reasoning is what we use when we come up with our hypotheses. Deductive reasoning is the type of reasoning that is used to develop a scientific theory. The definition of a hypothesis. So this is going to be what guides your experiment. When you design an experiment to test a certain question that you have in science, your hypothesis is going to guide the design of your experiment. So a hypothesis is an explanation based on observations and assumptions that leads to a testable prediction. So it's an explanation or statement explaining your question that you have, and it's a statement or explanation that you can test, that you can design a test for. An experiment is a scientific test, and in science we always do controlled experiments. So a controlled experiment. So here's an example of using the scientific method. So the observation is your desk lamp doesn't work. The question is, why doesn't your desk lamp work? You can go ahead and make a hypothesis that the bulb is blown. So hypothesis number 1, the bulb is improperly screwed in, or hypothesis number 2, the bulb is burnt out. And then you can go through, like let's say for your first hypothesis, you say the bulb is improperly screwed in. So the prediction is that when you reinstall the bulb, the same bulb, you screw it in properly, that will fix the problem. So the test is going to be to reinstall the bulb, unscrew it, rescrew it, and the result, if the result is that the desk lamp still doesn't work, then the hypothesis is not supported. So we go to hypothesis number 2, the bulb is burnt out. So now we have to replace the bulb. So the prediction is replacing the bulb will fix the problem. You test the prediction by replacing the bulb, not screwing in the same bulb, but replacing the bulb. And if the result is the lamp works, then your hypothesis number 2 is supported. Your hypothesis number 1 is not supported. So when we write a conclusion down here at the bottom, that's how we're going to start it. We're going to either say that our results supported or did not support our hypothesis. We're not going to say the hypothesis is true or the hypothesis is false. We're going to say it's supported or it's not supported. Which is what it says here. It says we can never prove that a hypothesis is true, but we can test it and have more confidence in it based on our results. So a hypothesis, when you write a hypothesis, it must be testable. It must be a testable statement. You can't write it as a question. So it says, for example, a hypothesis that ghost fooled with the desk lamp. So if that's your hypothesis, that a ghost played around with the desk lamp, you can't test that. So anything supernatural and religious, those explanations, while they may or may not be true, we can't test them with the scientific method. They are outside the bounds of science. So scientists don't necessarily discount supernatural and religious explanations, like there is a God and God created everything. Scientists don't say that isn't true. Scientists just say that that isn't something we can answer. That isn't a question we can answer through the use of the scientific method and experiments. So, okay, so this is a model for the scientific method. And it's just basically saying that we use all the steps of the scientific method, and you can't just say you go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. We just kind of bounce back and forth between the steps. The exploration and discovery, you could say a lot of that is observation, either observation that you make on your own, or when you do a Google search, when you do research to find out what other scientists have discovered. Then you use all that knowledge to formulate and test your hypothesis, form the hypothesis and your prediction, and then design your experiment. And then we're going to communicate those results, and those results can be used by society and benefit society. And all of that goes back into more exploration and discovery. So it's a process that just feeds on itself, basically. We learn more information and add to what we already learned, kind of thing. Okay, so we have this example, this case study that we're going to look at, a case study in scientific inquiry investigating coat coloration in mouse populations. All right, so Color patterns of animals can vary widely in nature. There are two populations of mice that belong to the same species. The species is Paromyscus polionotus. I have no idea if I said that correctly, but that is one species, and there are two variations in the coat color of these mice. There is one of these types of mice is the beach mouse, and it lives on white sand dunes, so it has a very light coat color. And then there's a mouse that lives more inland, farther away from the beach, and it lives on darker soil, so its coat is darker. You can see the beach mouse, light coat color, and then you can see the inland mouse, darker coat color. And this is near, around the Gulf of Mexico in Florida. Okay, so what we're looking at is, does camouflage affect predation rates on two populations of mice? So the experiment that was done, in each experiment, one was done at the beach, the other was done at the inland habitat. Okay, in each experiment there was a control group and an experimental group. At the beach, since the beach is the natural habitat there, the control group is the beach mice, which are light colored. And then the experimental group is that they placed some of the inland mice that are darker colored in that habitat. Okay, so what we can see is that there were many more, a higher percentage of inland mice that have the dark color that were killed by predators. And then in the inland habitat, when they placed the light colored mice, those were the experimental group here, and the control group was the dark colored mice. So they placed some of the light colored mice on the dark soil, and as you can see, in what you probably expect, is these are the ones that were eaten by predators. And you probably can even see why, because inland, in the inland habitat with the darker soil, the light color is more easy for the predators to see. And in the beach habitat with the light soil, the dark coat color is easier for the predators to see. So we'll get a few definitions here. In a controlled experiment, you have an experimental group and you have a control group. Now, the experimental group is the one that you are that has the variable that you're trying to test. So in this case, if no matter which habitat, whether it's the beach or inland, it's the mice that you introduced, the ones that don't normally live there, that aren't camouflaged to blend in with that habitat. So the non-camouflaged mice would be the experimental group in each case. And then your control group is the one that doesn't contain the variable that you're testing. So the camouflaged mice were the control group in each experiment. Okay, and the variables are quantities that vary in an experiment. The main variable here is the coat color of the mice. So when we talk about independent variables and dependent variables, the independent variable is the one that's manipulated by the researcher. So what do we change in the experimental group versus the control group? We change the coat color of the mice. So the independent variable would be the coat color of the mice, whereas the dependent variable would be the number of mice that are eaten by predators. So that is, the dependent variable is always what we measure in the experiment. Now, as far as a theory is supported by a large body of evidence in comparison to a hypothesis. So a theory is also an explanation, but it is an explanation for a larger idea, a larger question. But it's also got a lot of evidence behind it. So in comparison to a hypothesis, which is just, you just formulate a hypothesis before you do a single experiment. And a theory comes from the results of many, many, many experiments. So concept 1.4, science benefits from a cooperative approach and diverse viewpoints. And there's a section on that. There's a section on how in biology we use model organisms. And an example of a model organism is the fruit fly. That's used a lot in genetics research. The fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster. So that's an example of a model organism that's used in biology for genetics research. Technology is the application of science. Science is knowledge, and technology is the application of that knowledge. And I'm going to skip through some of this. So